Are live. Welcome to those of you that are just joining the session. We're very excited to have you all join the session. And it is why corporate accelerator programs fail. And we're joined by our very own Alex Osterwalder and Tendai Vicky. Alex, of course, author of The Invincible Company most recently, and Tendai Vicky, The Pirates in the Navy. Great to have you both. How are you both doing?
Really good. I'm just back from vacation.
I'm doing okay. I'm not back from vacation. Very jealous.
So motivating.
That's salty Tendai, if you've never met him before.
Brilliant. And you've got myself as well, part of it. And I haven't been on vacation either. Oh, no, I did actually. I just came back from Moldova. So that was good as well. Just throw that in there too. So what we're doing on today's session, well, there's four main parts. The first part is focusing on, we're going to talk about business models, not products. Then we're going to talk about the criteria to measure progress. We'll move on to finding a home in the core business. And then we'll go on to strategize a corporate incubator. Okay, so that's the plan for the session. If it sounds good, give me a thumbs up in the chat and we'll move on with it if that's all right. We haven't had much interaction yet, so feel free to share in the chat if you think that's a good plan so far. Excellent. I can see where people are coming from. That's good. Australia, Hamburg, Calgary, and Bastian says sounds good, and he's from Zurich, Switzerland as well. So this is great. Now, before we get into it, we do want to mention Strategizer's corporate incubator that we're going to be launching from the 4th. Well, it's going to be going on from the 14th of November to the 17th of February. And if you want to find out more, you can go to strategizer.com/corporate-incubator-registration-page. I'm going to drop that link in the Zoom because I think that's a bit of a mouthful. And you can also get in touch with sales@strategizer.com if you're a corporate innovation team and you're interested in potentially being part of that. Okay, now I'm going to hand over to Tendai.
Yeah, and I'd love a spotlight. Put me in the spotlight. Thank you, man. And really, it's really cool if you can join the Strategizer Corporate Incubator. I think it's going to be really powerful. And it's one of the reasons why we're running this session, because as we started setting this up, the question was like, well, why are we doing this? And what lessons can we bring to other folks that are trying to actually run this? And so that's why we're having this conversation with you around, what is it that actually makes corporate incubators and corporate accelerators sometimes fail? And so we are going to present you with the three different themes, and we're going to go like the positive thing to the negative thing, just to show you how this works really well. So one of the first reasons that we think why corporate accelerator programs fail is there's too much focus on products and technology and stuff from R&D. There's such a focus on like making cool products, making cool technologies, that people forget that they should also be thinking about how those products and technologies deliver great value propositions and the right business models to take those things to scale with. The second reason we think why corporate accelerator programs fail is there's too much measurement of the wrong things. So they measure activity, number of experiments run, number of ideas submitted, number of, all of those kinds of things. And it's not really the right things to be measuring. And what we should be measuring is impact. And Alex will talk to you about how do we make sure that we're measuring impact. And then finally, this is my personal pet peeve, is the isolated incubator, the corporate innovators that hate MBAs and want to be as far away from the MBAs as possible, when actually the only way that innovation succeeds is if you actually build a bridge between your incubation program or accelerator program and the core business, because that's the way you get the advantages when you're trying to scale. So let's start with the first one then. Let's talk about business models and not products. And this is the Strategizer mantra. We believe that, and I say this a lot, like the atomic unit of innovation is business models. And then there's always some smart aleck in the room who's like, so what's the subatomic unit? But what we really mean is like, that's the smallest piece that you should be thinking about. We tend to think of the smallest piece of innovation as the idea, the product, and the technology. But actually products, ideas, and technologies is more on the creative invention side. But when you're talking about innovation, it's about whether those things become successful in the world. And one of the most you'll see these t-shirts a lot during this webinar, one of the most common lean startup t-shirts is make something people want. This is a very common mantra of like, make stuff people want, make stuff people want. And it sounds really clever, but it's really strange because, as Roger Martin likes to say, if the opposite of your core strategic choices looks stupid, then every competitor will more or less be doing the same thing and have the exact same strategy as you. So the opposite of make stuff people want would be make stuff people don't want, which is kind of like a weird thing. So I don't know why we sort of focus on that a lot, because there's actually a more fundamental question that we need to be asking about, which is it still possible to make products that delight customers and fail? And that's something that I'd like to ask you on this call. Like, is it possible to make products that delight customers and still fail? So Nick, if you can share with them the mentee so they can go on there and show us what they're thinking.
Yep, absolutely.
Yeah.
Should be able
So
to see it now on screen.
Yeah, so please join the mentee. And we're really curious to see like your thoughts on whether it's possible. Alex, what do you think? What are your thoughts around this? But maybe don't give them the answer yet, but just
We'll wait a bit, right? And
yeah,
you can see the mentee code on top, right?
Yeah.
So join the mentee code on top, 3360
8490.
8490.
Excellent.
And there we
I can
go.
see 5 of you already up. Yep.
Kind of a rhetorical question, right? I mean, what changed? So the thing that did change, what's interesting is, for some time, if we can make a bad joke, some entrepreneurs were seeing venture capital as a revenue stream, which it's not, right? It's a subsidy to kind of keep you alive until you actually figured out, how to create value for customers, right? So this period is over. I think not entirely. I've worked with a startup that was able to burn through 20 million in quite a rapid, pace.
Right.
And they only did a business model canvas a bit later, after 1 year. But in that time is like, it's much harder, right? Today, you have to actually show something, not just a product that people want that's subsidized through venture capital.
Exactly. And so that's interesting. It seems like everybody agrees with us that it is possible to make a product that delights your customers and actually, still fail. And so, yeah, it is. Yes, it is possible to make stuff people want and still fail. So rather than making stuff people want, we should actually make stuff people want with a defensible business model. That's a horrible t-shirt. I don't know who would buy that t-shirt. It was too hard to read, but that's actually like more reality. Alex would buy that t-shirt, right? So we really need to think about how do we make stuff people want. I think that's really important because, again, even as we focus on, making products and services, we need to make sure that we're creating the right value. But then we need to make sure we're embedding that in terms of thinking about how do we create, deliver, and capture value within our business models. And this is really important because we're not saying this just out of the blue. Like, I've been in corporate accelerators, corporate incubators, even startup accelerators, where the focus is so much on the product roadmap and how well we're doing on delivering the product. And at the end of the process, people demo their products and not any progress they've made in validating the business model. And so that's really, really important that we make sure that we're really, really focusing on making sure we're creating the right business models for products. And then another thing that we want you to think about is some people think that they can work on their product first, lock that in, and then figure out the business model after. But actually, we think you should be thinking about the product and the business model from the start. And that matters because, especially when you're designing digital products, the way that the product is designed and the service is delivered is often an expression of the business model. So when I open the Uber app or the Airbnb app, what I'm interacting with is not just the user interface, it's also how that business model then instantiates itself out in the real world. So what you're learning about your business model will inform how you design the product. And that also actually applies to physical products as well. What you learn about your business model in terms of manufacturing costs, cost of delivery, packaging costs, will inform you to come and redesign what that looks like in terms of just its physical appearance. And so you really need to be thinking about the business model and the product from the beginning. And yeah, Alex, please go ahead.
Yeah, just very quickly, because Nick is going to hit me on the head because he's the timekeeper here. But it also includes, prototyping the numbers from the start. So while you don't need to be profitable for quite some time, as long as you have funding, it does mean you have to understand the numbers and the potential business model and test those, right? So from the start, you prototype business models and numbers, just so you start to actually learn what you need to learn, which is not just to build a product, right? That's probably the easiest part.
Exactly. And that's exactly the problem that they had at Xerox PARC, which is they had all the great technologies and they couldn't figure out how to business model it. So in case people don't know about this, but Xerox invented most of the technologies we use in computers right now, the mouse, the interfaces we use that we now call Windows, the graphic user interfaces, and they had no clue what to do with them. And so they ended up giving them all to Steve Jobs in exchange for a portion of Apple, I think 100,000 shares or something like that. And it's just like a really strange thing to happen because Xerox could have owned the computer age. But so you can really see that having a great technology, having a great offer, it's not going to help you become successful. And so thank you. We are going to hand you over to Alex, who's going to now take us to the criteria for measuring progress.
Okay, so second piece, I think that we're seeing, it's going wrong quite often, is that teams are, and the company itself, too focused on actually measuring the wrong thing. So measuring activity rather than measuring progress, right? So here's another t-shirt, right? 1 experiment a week. Now, this is not wrong, and it's something we like to say, with David Bland, who led the testing business ideas book with us. This is not wrong, but it's not enough, right? And I'll tell you why, because the experiment is not the goal. And while you are running 1 experiment a week, you have to keep your eyes on the prize. And another terrible t-shirt slogan is way too long, but you need to focus. What do you actually want to learn? Based on the evidence and the insights, you're going to make decisions and you're going to make progress towards a viable business model, or let me emphasize this, or to kill the idea, right? Because sometimes corporate incubators and accelerators need to be able to kill, because otherwise, 1099, like that, you're condemned to succeed and then you won't innovate, right? But the key here is measure the right stuff. So way too often in corporations, because that's key to execution, people focus on measuring activity. How many experiments have we performed? How hard are the teams working? And all of that, it's not wrong, but it's not what we really need to keep our eye on. What you really want to keep your eye on, and this almost sounds trivial, but if you look at the metrics of what people actually measure in corporations, it's not this. Measuring progress in innovation means measuring the amount and strength of evidence that's showing progress towards a viable business. And it could be very little activity. Great, we got lucky. Or it could be a ton of activity that leads to 0 progress. Well, what do? You need to be able to kill the idea, right? So what you really, really, really want to measure most, doesn't mean you're not going to measure activity, but the only thing that really matters is, are you making progress towards a viable business or not? And that's obviously in phases. First, you're going to learn about customers, then you're going to learn about products and solutions and value propositions. Then you're going to learn about acquisition. But what you do need to learn is progress. So let me just very, very quickly sketch this out so we stay on time. And some of you might have seen me make this drawing a lot, right? In innovation, entrepreneurship, whatever you get into your corporate accelerator, it's about going from idea to a viable business. Let's call this, $100 million or $1 billion business, doesn't really matter. And when you start, risk and uncertainty is very high, right? Risk and uncertainty, very high. And you need to admit this, and it's not the activity that you really want to measure most, it's how much progress are you making towards this viable business. That's the only measure that matters. Are we measuring the reduction of risk and uncertainty? So yes, you're going to run experiments. You're going to talk to customers about their jobs, pains, and gains. And when you learn what they actually care about or what they don't, you reduce risk and uncertainty. This is the thing that we need to measure, because potentially you could run 50 experiments and not reduce risk and uncertainty. You might just reduce the risk not to build something, nobody wants, but you haven't made progress because you actually only made progress towards killing the idea. Ultimately, this is the progress we care about. So you will increase the spending only when you start to kind of learn what works and what doesn't. But what you need to measure most is not activity, not the experiments, not the money. You do need to measure that, but the only thing that matters is risk reduction. And one thing I briefly mentioned there, was taking an entire webinar, is strength of evidence. So when you did interviews, people told you what they're interested in. But when you do a landing page with a call to action, or you got people to prepay, well, guess what? That evidence is stronger. So you made more progress when you got stronger evidence. So with that, maybe we can go towards a question, Nick. And the question is, which one of these are actually measures of activity and which ones are measures of progress? So I have a whole series here: number of experiments run, number of assumptions tested, number of interviews, validated jobs, pains and gains, number of MVPs and prototypes, number of pre-sales. So go back to Menti and give us your opinion. Where on this scale would you put each of these? More on the activity side or more on the progress side? If we measure the number of experiments run, is that a measure of activity or is that a measure of progress or somewhere in between? So let's get some voting done here. Okay, let's see. Interesting. Penda, any thoughts when you see this?
Yeah, no, it's pretty cool. I think your message landed very well. Like, number of experiments run is the lowest scoring.
Yeah. And I see some number of assumptions tested. Right? Number of assumptions tested. There's some hesitation there. Where does that really go?
And I think number of MVPs and prototypes is getting too high a score, personally.
And number of interviews, same thing, right? Because you could, and here's what I want to emphasize. You could do 100 interviews, but not make any progress towards a viable business idea. You will make progress towards, oh, we're going to kill this idea. So yes, if we look at progress in that sense, are we getting closer to the killing decision? For sure. But number of interviews doesn't matter. Number of experiments run doesn't matter per se. You could run one experiment and potentially get really far towards proving, but usually it takes a whole series.
And it's the same thing for number of prototypes. Like, the prototypes do not, like, you could build prototypes forever and still make no progress towards finding a business model that works. But things like the number of pre-sales, for sure, validated jobs, pains and gains, for sure, those things show you that you're on track, right?
Okay, let's get to the solution. Let's get to the solution. And we would have something that looks a bit more like this, and I'll get out of the way in the meantime here. So on the left-hand side, I'd put those things that are really a measure of activity. How many interviews have you done? How many experiments did you run? Number of prototypes. So I'm not saying you shouldn't measure this and you don't need to do interviews and activities like that, but it doesn't give you any sense of progress, because you could do 100 experiments and make no progress towards a viable business. We did actually learn that there's nothing there and you should kill. Now, when we're talking about number of assumptions tested, okay, if we went with the definition I just gave you right now, probably it'd go a little bit more over here. If we had said number of assumptions validated, it would be somewhere here, probably in the middle, because we don't know, is it the most important assumptions or is it a collection of assumptions that are actually not so important, right? When we're talking about jobs, pains and gains, well, we're now here in validating what we would draw like this, the customer. And now we're talking about validating revenue stream, right? So it'd be more right-hand side. So not an exact science, but we want to give you a feel of people actually measuring sometimes the wrong things. What we really believe in, we have these strategizer innovation metrics. We believe in measuring the amount and strength of evidence for each category of risk: desirability, feasibility, viability, and adaptability. And I think somebody in the chat was already mentioning that they did some experiments around desirability and then actually had to kill a product that worked because they couldn't get more evidence on feasibility. So you get the point? Important to measure the right thing. And with that, I'm going to throw it back to you, Tendai, on finding a home in the core business.
Oh, one thing, Alex, just before we hand it over, there was an interesting comment from Tendai, which was what he would like is a t-shirt which says "Condemned to Succeed," right? And this goes back to a point that you said that we forgot. Go on, I'll let you jump in.
Yeah.
100%. So super important to remember, sometimes the evidence points towards you need to kill the projects. And too often corporate accelerators fail because when teams come in, they're expected to succeed. Oh, we're giving you all this money and, but that's not the point. Actually, the only thing that should happen in an incubator and accelerator is that they work on producing evidence. And when it can't be produced, it's okay to kill the project, right? So I want that t-shirt as well now, Tendai.
Yeah, I really want it. I think people will think I'm vain. Like, oh, he thinks he's going to make it anyway, like condemned to succeed. I don't think they'd ever connect it to innovation. But yeah, okay. So let's move on and have a different conversation. And Alex, there was a nice comment by Manuel as well, which is small number of interviews, of course, means that you're not really that confident. But then even if you get a large number of interviews, which is my response, it only increases your confidence that much because you're measuring only what people say rather than what they do. And so you don't want a small number of interviews, but you don't want to overreact to the evidence from a large number of interviews either. And that's kind of a balance you always have to do when you're kind of doing this work. And so let's talk a little bit now about, so you can see where we're going with this, right? So a corporate accelerator can fail if the people are just focused on products and they're not really thinking about the business model and how they go to market. And then if they do start thinking about the business model, the projects can still fail and the accelerator can still fail because the teams are not really tracking the progress they're making towards validating those business models. So you start off with like just products only, and then you can fail because of that. Then you start focusing on business models, but now you're not tracking progress, and then you can fail because of that. And then finally, if you do find a business model that works, you can fail because you won't find a home inside the core business. And that's something that accelerators really struggle with, because part of the dance that you have to do is to see what you would like, where you'd like to be in relationship to the core business. Because a lot of corporate innovators I've met really hate MBAs. I think this is a very popular t-shirt, if we were to make it, the I hate MBAs t-shirt. And actually, Steve Blank says something really cool, which is actually a good t-shirt. Like, I think we should make this one, which is MBAs pay your salary and innovators pay the pension, which is that the core business is really important because that's what's funding all the innovation work that we're doing. And that's also what's going to help us scale. And then as we work on innovation, we're ensuring that the business lasts into the future, so innovators pay our pension. And so there's a balance there. It's not that we're antagonistic towards the core business, is that those two parts of the business have to work together. And that's our job as corporate innovators. But before I go any further, there's a really interesting conversation that we would like to have with you. So as you go along these two dimensions of, explore and exploit, right? As you go along these two dimensions, you get the three types of innovation. You get efficiency innovation, you get sustaining innovation, and then I'm doing that the wrong way around. Alex is going to laugh at me. You get transformative innovations that are over this side, and then you get your sustaining innovations that are in the middle, and then you get your efficiency innovations that are over here on the exploit side. So the question we have is, if you're working on these three types of innovations, where should they sit? Should they be in the accelerator program or in the incubator program away from the core business, or should they be within the core business? And so again, let's go to the mentee and see what people think there, Nick. And Alex, this is one that I would love for you to comment on, because you got very well articulated, strong views on this. So if the data comes in.
It's coming in slowly now. We've got a couple people that have answered. Now 5 people have answered. So everyone's getting in there now.
Yeah.
That's interesting.
Really interesting. Yeah.
So my guess is also that we have a pretty informed and educated audience here.
Yes.
At the end of the day, to a certain extent, it's a false question, right? Because you could have an accelerator that takes on ideas that are efficiency innovation, but are funded by the business unit, right? So that where it sits is not necessarily a physical space or in an org chart alone. There's also the funding mechanisms and the mental mindset, right? As long as we know the differences and what might prevent transformative innovation from taking off, it's about managing those risks, right?
Yeah, no, absolutely. But I think that if you were to give us a rule of thumb, it's generally that efficiency innovations should sit in the core business, and then sustaining 100%. Innovations, depending on the number of risks that are underlying it and how much it's disrupting the core business model, can also either sit in the core business or in the off to the side in the accelerator program. And then transformative innovations much more likely to succeed, right? Especially in the early stages where they haven't been proven if they're really sitting outside of the core business.
Then I would be very, very dogmatic that it's extremely rare that transformative innovation can survive within a business unit, within an operating P&L. In particular, and it doesn't even have to be disruptive, right? But it's just different, right? Different margins, maybe even different goals, and they don't directly contribute to the typical kind of P&L. So transformative innovation cannot, they cannot sit within a business unit. That rarely works. I haven't seen it work.
Yeah. And so that's the interesting challenge, right? If we're saying that transformative innovation should sit inside the core business, then the question is, and I'm going to move over here so people can see who that is. That's Joe Gertner. And he's got this really interesting quote, which is that almost by definition, not a single person can ever create an innovation, right? The task is too variegated and involved. In the end, if you're going to launch successful innovation out into the world, you really need to work with the core business. So that's the paradox of what we're saying, right, Alex, which is even as we're saying that for transformative innovation, you should put that outside the core business, it doesn't mean that you are not working or collaborating with the core business. So you build and work on your idea in your incubator, but you build relationships with the core business in order to make sure that that actually works. And that's actually a double-sided coin that every corporate incubator has to sort of deal with, every corporate accelerator has to deal with. And what's interesting is that a lot of innovators are really happy and they celebrate when they get their accelerator away from the core business. They're like, we're away from the MBAs, we've been saved. And then they work on their ideas without ever trying to build a bridge back to the core. And then they struggle when they try and then take those ideas to scale. And one of my favorite stories, special shout out to Gina Mitchell, who's now part of our team. But when I was working with them at TD Ameritrade, I remember one of the teams saying, Tendai, we used to call our innovation lab the home for homeless ideas. And what we found out later on was, if an idea is homeless when it comes to the lab, it will be homeless when it leaves. And so part of the work, even though you're like a home for homeless ideas, part of the work is to make sure the idea succeeds at a business model level. That's half of the work. The other half of the work is that it finds a home in the core business. And not only that, but that you're able to leverage the advantages of doing innovation in a large company. And Alex, this speaks to your principle of a startup in chains, because the coolest thing about being a startup, right? The coolest thing about being a startup is that you can work on stuff you like. There's no restrictions. You can pivot your idea. You are accountable to investors if you have them, but it's not the same kind of restrictions that you have if you're working inside a large company. So if you're working inside a large company, you already have those restrictions, but now you don't even have the benefits. So like, what's the point, right? And you can explain that a little bit better, that whole concept of being a startup in chain.
And there's actually, the best way to kind of frame it is Steve Blank calls this a two-front war. We might just want to get away from the war analogy, but it's a two-front fight, a two-front battle, right? On the one hand side, you're fighting to get your business model right, getting customers interested. On the other hand, you're fighting for executive buy-in, right? So that's a really important dance, which actually means that the innovation leaders, their job is not to run an accelerator. Their job is actually a political one, which is to get everybody on board. And that's sometimes what people get wrong in innovation. Their job, is they should have a team that takes care of the innovation projects, the accelerators and incubators, the actual work, because their job is a political one. Like with most kind of senior leaders, to create the conditions for success that there is a home. When there isn't, create the conditions that we can create a new P&L. So that is often underestimated, that the innovation leaders should actually not. And I one of our friends, Henning Trill, said that he underestimated that for a very long time. He was really focused on getting the innovation kind of projects right, that he neglected that his job was really much more about connecting with other leaders. So interesting kind of insight.
Yeah, no, I mean, and that's a super fascinating insight in the sense that I've even heard some innovators going, we don't need to worry about dealing with the core business. If our idea becomes successful, we'll just spin it out. And I was like, do you know how hard it is to spin something out of a corporation? Now you got like the corporate finance team involved, the legal team involved. What are the contracts? What is the nature of the structure of the spin out? You cannot just spin something out. You always have to do collaborative work with the core business, which is why this is one of my favorite quotes by Hobie Darling. He's a former Nike executive. He used to work in Nike labs where they invented the Nike band. And he says, when you work for a large company, you need to spend a lot of time lining up the cannons, right? You need to line up the cannon for marketing, the cannon for legal and compliance. Some of the cannons are even pointed at you and your team, so you need to turn them around so they can point somewhere else. But if you're working in a large company and you're successful in lining up all the cannons, the advantages you have means that when you fire them, it just goes off in a big bang. So that's something that people have failed to pay attention to when it comes to corporate innovation, which is you do need to work to maximize the advantages of being a corporate innovator. So that's a really, really interesting kind of take on that. And so that's, go ahead, Alex. I was starting to get passionate there.
I think this is absolutely crucial because we tend to, I believe, to a certain extent, kind of over-glamorize the startup world and say, oh, the disruptions are going to come from the startup world. While that's mainly correct today, I really believe that corporations have so many assets that, if I may say it in a provocative way, if they get their act together, they're going to be innovation machines that create enormous value for customers and society. So I think we shouldn't make fun of corporations, but actually really see them as, we need to get this right in companies because there's so much value that we can unlock. And there are good examples out there. I mean, let's take one that we like, China's not, in en vogue these days, but Ping An and Jessica Tan, who was just elected to one of the top women leaders of the planet. She led innovation at Ping An, large company, but they were in the top 500. Now they're in the top 20 companies of the world. So once you unleash those cannons in the right direction, there is such a huge, enormous potential for value creation. So I think we need to really, really kind of get that right and not make fun or be cynical, but actually do the work. So corporates can create that.
Yeah, actually, Andreessen Horowitz, some of the partners there, I think his name is Alex Rempel, has got a really good piece of advice that they give their startups. And they tell them that in the battle between a startup and an incumbent, the question is, can the startup find distribution before the incumbent finds innovation? Because if the incumbent beats you to innovation, they've already got distribution. They've got access to markets, access to customers, they've got scale. So the startup has to innovate and then find scale, whereas a large company can leverage what they have to scale. So that if the incumbent finds innovation before the startup finds distribution, they can crush the startup. And so that's what Andreessen Horowitz are trying to encourage the team to go find distribution before the incumbent finds innovation, right?
And I would expand that actually to what in our world, in the Invincible company, we call that business model shifts. So when you have a business model, you have probably quite a few strengths that you're not using today. And I think the best example of an unbelievable business shift was with Amazon Web Services. So people might not know the story, but the reason Amazon, could be so successful so quickly is because they were an e-commerce, very low margin business. So their IT infrastructure was so much more efficient and effective than what you would find at Google and Microsoft that are high margin businesses, that when they launched Amazon Web Services, their weakness, low margins, immediately became their strength. So they made this shift and turned a weak part of their business model into an incredible competitive advantage. And I think today, and that's back to, don't just think products, think business model. What do you have today that can allow you to build completely new business models, but where your existing business model can be a launchpad? And another example is Netflix, right? Moving from DVD by mail to streaming. That was their initial goal, but they were already thinking at the launch of the business, they were thinking business model transformation. So this is a completely underexplored topic. Sounds a bit scary, but I think when we get this into corporations, it's a huge wealth of opportunity for value creation.
Yeah, no, absolutely. So yeah, no, thank you for that, Alex. And unfortunately, you're gonna have to keep talking because you're gonna introduce everyone to the to our upcoming incubator. So over to you.
Yeah, I was getting very passionate and excited over there. So yeah, let's round it off before we maybe have some time for Q&A. Nick, I'll see you tell us if we do. I want to show just a little bit what we're doing right now with this Strategizer corporate incubator. So the idea here is we thought, well, how could we launch something to really take our best practices and make it accessible to corporations before they scale it internally? So it's this vehicle that we created so corporations can send a team, just one team, to shape, test, and adapt an idea with growth potential. And by learning how it's really done based on the best practices that we discovered, through trial and error, they can then bring this back in and, either work with us or on their own to actually scale all this knowledge. So what do you get when you do this is you really learn how to design and test ideas. You develop those skills because innovation and entrepreneurship is a skill you can learn. And we know how to teach them with these tools. And then the last one is not training, it's actually something that produces results. So that's why we get so excited about the Strategizer Corporate Incubator, because you produce results. And ultimately, through a series of workshops, a series of kind of testing in the field, and then some presentations at the end, and that accompanied with best-in-class coaching, you really get something out of this. And you can start to copy that model and bring it into your own organization, because that's ultimately the goal that we have, is to equip corporations around the world, starting with the big ones, hopefully moving towards SMEs over time, equipping them with the best-in-class innovation kind of experience that we have. If I dive just very quickly a little bit deeper, so you can already learn how we do this. So if you're running an incubator, feel free to copy. So we start off with a kickstart kind of period where it's really about getting into the fundamentals of innovation and building shared language. So learning the tools, learning what are we focusing on, the metrics, that it's okay to fail, how to fail, what to measure, and what the expectation is. What do we want to see at the end of a 12-week sprint? This is a 12-week sprint. Then after that kind of kickstart, which is a bit more around training, learning about the tools, immediately going into shaping and iterating ideas. Shaping in the sense that, designing value proposition canvas, business model canvas, understanding what's a good business model. Because as Tendai mentioned, from the start, we want people to understand business models, not just products, right? Because at the end of the day, it's about building a viable business. It's not about building a product. And then, of course, the big part here is getting out of the building, to use Steve Blank's words, and test. And it's actually, this should be yellow and red. It's an iteration between these two, because you test, you learn, and you need to redesign. So you reshape your ideas, and the coaches help you make sense of the interpretation of the data, of the evidence that you're getting, and turning that back into better value propositions and business models. And then at the end, after we already did iterate and make decisions every week, there is a point where you synthesize the knowledge from a sprint, you synthesize that evidence, and as a team, you make an evidence-based presentation. So not the typical, oh, I'm going to show my product and how great it is. Absolutely not, because nobody cares. You show the evidence that you were able to produce over the period of the sprint with a very, sharp 8-minute presentation at the end of the day, so you can make a decision, or so you can present to the leadership or to a growth board to make evidence-based, fact-based investments decisions. And here we really, really go deep into all of these our trade secrets, give them away, doing this on our platform so that teams who go through this experience get just the best of the best of what we've learned through trial and error, so we can incorporate this into innovation in companies around the world. Anything you would want to add, Tendai, because you've seen this stuff in action in the field? We've already did one of these as a coach assessment center, right? But anything you would want to add to what I just said?
No, not a lot to add. Just, I mean, the whole focus on, I think the value that we bring is the ability to focus not just on the idea, but to make sure that, you're testing and validating the business model. I think also what I love about the incubator is this combination of learning skills and tools and how to do really great work while simultaneously creating value for your organization by actually working on an actual idea and running an innovation sprint on an actual idea. So I think it's a great opportunity for organizations to take advantage.
Is real world training, right? And somebody did ask, Lee, as a solo entrepreneur, is it better to complete the books? I do think the price point of the corporate incubator and the coaching support you get is tailored to large company budgets. So as a solo entrepreneur, I don't think the accelerator that we're offering today is the right one. I would hope that maybe in 2 years or so, we can make this product accessible through, more technological support to solo entrepreneurs and individual teams. Today, we're not equipped for that yet. It's really also quite some good support through coaches. With that, I do want to show.
So Alex, there's a question. There's a question. Is there any geographical limitation? They're asking. They're from Egypt.
No, so absolutely not. So when we did this the first time with startups, so we tested the whole thing already with startups, and it's the approach we use inside corporations today. It's across the world, right? So when we did this for startups, that was the public one that we can even share the videos, maybe Nick online that video where you see the pitch sessions. We had 200 teams apply. We took 10, that was a free product that we offered to entrepreneurs. We picked 10 teams out of 200 and they came from across the world, right? We had a team from Africa. Did we have a team from Asia, Nick? I can't remember.
I can't remember
did have teams
off the top of my head. I can't remember, but I'm just finding the link, so you'll be able to watch all the videos anyway.
Definitely from North America and Europe, and I think 2 teams from Latin America. So absolutely no geographical restriction, that's for sure. So with that, I think we have time for some Q&A, and then do you want to rate the session first before we go to questions, Nick?
Yes, I'm going to share the poll now. Should be coming up. And the question that we'll be asking is, if you hadn't participated in this webinar, you'd be 1, very disappointed, 2, somewhat disappointed, 3, not disappointed, or 4, I wouldn't have wasted my time. So if you could share that with us, it just helps us kind of understand how we're doing with our webinars, whether they're helping you. It's a useful bit of quantitative data for us. So while you're doing that, I'm going to hand the hot potato back over to you, Alex, I believe, for the Q&A from anyone kind of asking any questions that they've got at the moment.
Yeah, I wasn't. Yeah, I'll let it to Tendai. I think you were following the chat, right? Because I wasn't.
Oh, there we go. So Sebastian is asking. You mentioned startups. I have a question. Make versus buy. Some executives would argue that acquiring a disruptive startup is enough, perhaps less risky. When and how would you advise them to go for opt-in for in-house innovation instead of buying?
So it's a very good question, and I had this conversation I can't remember just yesterday, but I can't remember who it was actually. But so you always should go for in-house experimentation and testing because you will make better acquisitions. So you don't need to grow the project internally, but you should go at least for 2 consecutive sprints, right? So do one 12-week sprint and then potentially, you know, a 24-week sprint afterwards, because the experiments get a little bit more deeper and longer. And then based on that, you can make acquisition or investment decisions. What I would not advise is to think hard and then make acquisitions or investments. The in-house learning is crucial. And you can always at any point decide, do we know enough to make an acquisition or an investment? Or do we know enough to actually decide to grow this internally because of whatever competitive advantage? So you need to use the whole toolbox, but I wouldn't undervalue kind of the insight. Now I remember it was with Sean from Carnegie Mellon, Sean Amariati, and we were talking about the lack of integration today between corporate venture capital, in-house innovation, and other kind of strategic innovation activities. So these are not coordinated enough, and we're leaving a lot of energy on the table, and a lot of waste happens there because they're happening in different parts of the organization and they're not aligned. And we've seen this again and again and again. The corporate venture team is over there, the innovation team is over here, and then there's another group that does other innovation activities over there. So I would not go immediately for investment or acquisitions. I would always, I mean, let me not say always, but always consider doing the experimentation first before you do the acquisitions and the investments.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And then Matthias, absolutely, like Nick said, this will be available as a video right after, so you can share with your bunch of colleagues. Maybe your colleagues are running a corporate accelerator and they've a lot to learn from this. But then David also asked this question, right? Is there value in having a team member or two that are just tasked primarily with building the bridge to the core, like just working on that, on the programmatic, components to facilitate that work, to grow innovation acumen within the core business? And yeah, absolutely, I would say that, right? I mean, Alex, when Alex first designed the structure of what he thinks should be the way that a corporate innovation function works, he put in a role there that he called the chief ambassador, somebody who just like builds a bridge between the work that's being done in the core business and work that's being done in the incubator or accelerator. Because actually, it's important for the incubator to know what's happening strategically in the core business and what leaders care about, and also then for the core business to know exactly what the accelerator is working on, so that they can sort of work collaboratively. So absolutely, that role of ambassador is really, really important. And if in lieu of having an ambassador, then whoever is the head of incubator, that's your job. That's more your job than actually working on ideas, right?
Manuel had a good question. Within this 12-week sprint, how far should we get regarding, e.g., an MVP development? 12 weeks is rather short. And that's a very good point. So in other webinars, we insisted on not starting with building. You don't need to build something to test. So there's this complete misconception. And I do think it comes from, Eric Ries's framing, which I don't think he really meant literally, build, measure, learn. You should never build as the first activity. That's the worst thing you could do. First activity already is kind of sketch out your ideas and come up with your hypothesis, but generally test the customer first. Don't build anything if you don't have a deep understanding of customer jobs, pains, and gains. So within the first 12 weeks, we want to see really good evidence, strong evidence, call to action evidence on the existence of jobs, pains, and gains, potentially some conversations around willingness to pay, and we do not expect an MVP. Could be, and it depends a bit how you define an MVP. So we would have something that we call value scenes. You can Google that, value scenes, where we show a solution, but it's a sketch. That's technically not an MVP, right? There's a bit of a religious war around what an MVP is. Minimal viable product as a product that does something. That you don't need in a 12-week sprint. It's the last thing you want to do. So generally, people start to build too early without a deep understanding of jobs, pains, and gains. Why is it so important? Because if customers now don't want this MVP. You don't know if they don't want it because your solution doesn't perform the way that it should, or if they actually have those jobs, pains, and gains. So why aren't you first testing jobs, pains, and gains? Because once you know they have those jobs, pains, and gains, now when you test your MVP and they don't care, you know it's because your MVP is broken, not because they don't have the jobs, pains, and gains. So within 12 weeks, we understand strong evidence around the customer. We do not need strong evidence around the solution yet, because that would be over expecting. Again, depends a bit on the context.
All right, cool. I think we should address one last question, right, Nick? I think we've got enough time for just one last question.
Yeah.
So that's an interesting one now. It's about personality, behavioral, psychological differences between those people that are successful in the core business and those that are successful in it, in accelerators and doing innovation. How do you even manage for those differences, Alex? Like, what are your thoughts around that?
So sometimes, and I'll kind of answer with a deviation to hear what you think, Tenda, but sometimes people say, how do we pick the right people, right? The right innovators? Well, I don't think you pick them. You actually create an environment in which anybody can try it. And then they have to prove, right? Then it's it's like in the startup world, you get some funding to start. You can't pull it off, can't get any evidence. Well, too tough luck. Your project gets killed, and that should be okay, right? So you have to prove yourself. That's how you manage it. What you do need to make sure of is that people can come back and do this several times to a point where you will have some that do that. They become professional innovators, right? And they get really good at this. But don't try to pick them, because some might look better at this. Oh, these are idea people. Idea people are generally those who are not good entrepreneurs, because entrepreneurship is not about ideas. It's actually about turning an idea into a viable business. So create the ecosystem so the winning ideas and the winning teams can emerge. And maybe the last thing, I remember I was running a dinner for senior executive team, and the CEO said, oh, I get it, Alex. We need to infect everybody with the innovation virus. And I said, no, actually quite the contrary. You already have people with the innovation virus. What you need to do is create a transparent system where innovators know where to go and what to do, and they will come. You don't need to infect anybody with anything, because as long as you just create this ecosystem, they will come and they will succeed. So super important, right? And for me, that was like, wow, I've never heard anybody say it that way. And it for me got clear that that's exactly the wrong thing. You don't need to create a lot of innovators. They're already there. Give them the vehicles so they can innovate.
Yeah, absolutely. And then of course, there will be folks that are uninterested in innovation, especially in the early stages, but they do have a role in helping innovation become successful towards the end. So it's really interesting. Like Steve Blank is really a nice place to go and read some of these like dichotomies in the startup world, because he will advise startups on how they're not like established companies and how they need to use iterative methods to find the right business model to scale. And then later on, he'll write a piece about why founders get fired, because once this company is ready to scale, they sometimes the wrong personalities for that. And so that balance between being entrepreneurial and being then later able to execute and drive things to scale is how the core business and innovators collaborate. So you don't need to change people's personalities. Just give people opportunities. Those that are interested in innovation can pick it up. And then once those things are ready for scale, they should know that they need to collaborate with those more MBA type personalities in the core business to drive that towards success.
Tenda, I do have one more for you. So our friend Tyler Anderson is asking, have you ever run into a situation where the corporate strategy team thinks they own innovation? And if so, how did they solve for that? So my immediate quick reaction was, it's actually a good place for innovation to sit, right? Yeah. But it depends, of course, how the corporate strategy team understands innovation or not. But I know you've been very specifically confronted with that situation. So maybe you can share your experience, Tenda.
Yeah, I mean, so that all depends on like how the corporate strategy function thinks innovation works. Because sometimes actually corporate strategy is a really great place for innovation to sit, because they have access to resources and they're allowed to explore the future, because they can say that they're actually working on strategic things. So I think for us, and this is a really like I hate giving these sorts of answers because they're so non-specific. Like, it's not really where innovation sits as such. It's in terms of, is it strategy, is it this, is it that? It's more like, is there a function that's responsible for driving innovation? Is it sitting at the highest level in the org chart? And are they putting in place the right practices for innovation to actually thrive? Because the chief strategy and growth officer that we work with at a specific organization is really driving the right innovation practices and building the right processes for products to become successful. In another organization, in Ping An, it's the chief entrepreneur who is a co-CEO. In another organization, it is the chief innovation officer who reports directly to the CEO. So the question is not whether or not the strategy office owns innovation, but how they're owning that innovation. Are they owning it by saying, no, we don't do anything else, we just do corporate venture capital, the rest of the stuff, we'll just write strategy documents about the future? Or are they owning it in such a way that allows innovators to thrive?
And what I'd add to that, Tendai, is exactly the general answers, where does it sit, who owns it? Probably not as important as it's slightly different framing of a general answer, as long as innovation has power, right? And that could be, if the corporate strategy function has power, that's okay. If it doesn't, it shouldn't sit there, right? So I think it's more important to look at the indicators than actually where physically kind of in the org chart it sits. If innovation has no power, it can sit anywhere. It's not going to work, right?
Exactly. Yeah, absolutely. So yeah, no, thank you, everyone. Thank you for the questions and really enjoyable session. Over to you, Nick, to take us to the close.
Yeah, we're going to have to end it there. But if you want to hear more from Tendai, Alex, and even myself, actually, you can go to our YouTube channel. If you go to youtube.com, of course, search for Strategizer, there's loads of videos that we've posted there. There's some really good ones that I posted just recently of Tendai that goes into a little bit more about your last answer, I think, there, Tendai, as well, which I think are really interesting. So definitely check that out. One thing that I'll do just to remind you, if you wanted to, but you haven't had the chance yet, and you want to get in touch about the corporate incubator, you can send an email to our sales team, gunjan.gupta@strategizer.com. It's probably the most direct email to send to find out more. Or you could just scan the QR code to be able to put a calendar invite straight in there via Calendly with him. So that's that. We've done the feedback. I just also want to mention one last thing. Sorry, Tendai's eager to go, but one last thing. From Innovation Theatre to Growth Engine, download the playbook as well if you haven't already. You can go to strategizer.com/playbook to be able to download that. And if you want some help with implementing that as well, just sales@strategizer.com is what you can do. So thank you, everybody. It's been an absolute pleasure. Thanks again to Alex. Thanks to Tendai once again. And we look forward to seeing you next time. Keep an eye out on strategizer.com/webinars if you want to register to hear when our next webinar will be. And until then, have a fantastic rest of your morning, day, afternoon, night, and see you later, everybody.
Thanks, everybody.
Thanks everyone.
Thanks, Tendai.
Thanks, Nick.
Thanks, both. Thank you. Thank you, everybody.